examples of what we've been seeing. Well, joining us now to discuss this story further is the Director of Academics for Academic Freedom, Professor Dennis Hayes. Dennis, just tell us your overall thoughts on this story. It's a bit mad, isn't it?
Well, I first came across trigger warnings in 2014. A very well-known article by the British-American journalist Jenny Jarvie. It was actually called Trigger Happy. It was published in the New Republic. And she made the point then that they were banning books that people found difficult. There were people being hypersensitive to students. And she tracks it back, actually, that trigger warnings were originally given for people surfing lonely on the internet. And in case they came across something that they might find uncomfortable, trigger warnings were there. And she and others said, well, will this apply to universities? Because you're not alone. You've got your students, you've got academics, you can all debate and discuss. And I was just looking back at the history, and later on that year, people said, this will never apply to universities. Trigger warnings have become meaningless. And I can't count the number of times I've been asked to write or comment on trigger warnings. So I thought, what's actually happening? And what is interesting is not so much the article, but what the responses to it are. And 3 clear responses came out. The first one was, well, it's only a few books. So it just ban a few books, so that's not a problem. The second one was, and I think Mary Beard said this, it's just a curriculum review. We're just changing a few books. And the third response, particularly about trigger warnings, is there's nothing wrong with this. This is what we all do. All our lecturers put trigger warnings and suggest things to students. And it made me think that, why has it come up again, trigger warnings? Because it's not news. These things have been going on, and the Times did that bit of research. But it tells me that something's different now. And I think it's what's happened to the whole structure of universities has changed. You've heard me say before, they've adopted a therapeutic culture. They were working towards a therapeutic university. And I do think this relates to the Rushdie case, because on the 25th anniversary of the fatwa, I did a big debate here in Derby with 5 or 6 speakers, and I got a quote from Kenan Malik, a great writer on race, and he said, the trouble with academics and cultural figures is they've absorbed the fatwa, they've internalised the fatwa, they've internalised it, so they naturally censor. Now, I think, I was listening to your calls for free speech and challenging it, but I don't think you're going to be able to do it unless you recognise the fundamental problem. And when we're in a therapeutic culture where you're too sensitive to what you think are the students' feelings, that you protect them. And back in 2014, people were saying this will flatten the university experience for students. They will only get certain text and safe text. And I can give you an example about how thorough this is, because every single lecturer in every university, under the pretext of decolonising the curriculum, is looking at every book that they're using and every subject. And what happens then is not that you choose the best books, or the best books by authors of colour. For instance, Frederick Douglass, C.L.R. James, Thomas Sowell, the right-wing thinker who never gets mentioned, or Kenan Malik himself, and many others are great. But that's not what happens. What happens is woke books get put in, books about identity politics, your lived experience. So what is really happening is, in that therapeutic culture, there's a real challenge to free speech, because only one view is going to be heard, and that's the view that never upsets anybody.